this is a round table. So I think of round tables as discussion opportunities as opposed to a main presentation. So just a little bit about me, and then what I have done is identify topics that I think are important in the life of an author, and I'm happy to discuss any of them that might be of interest to you. So I have a book that's in the 9th edition. I came onto that in the 2nd edition. And I have a New York criminal law, which is a treatise for lawyers. And that I came on somewhere along the way 20 years ago or so, and that one's updated annually. So I've dealt with a variety of publishers through the various editions of the hotel and restaurant and travel law textbook. I've been through 3 or 4 publishers, many editors, a number of contracts, a number of co-authors, a number of formats. So I am happy to share what knowledge I might have gained through this process. So here's what I think are the key topics that we might discuss. And because this is a roundtable, I'm happy to comment on any of them. And we have some other senior authors here who can add as well. So one is the time required, which I think is an important topic to think about. Know your why. What is your motivation? Because that's going to bear on how well you do in the pursuit of writing a textbook. The issue of, and this, Renee, is what we had gone back and forth with, is a new book or join an existing one. My path for textbooks has been to join an existing one, and I found that very helpful. To me, when I came on, I viewed what I had as a draft and was given a carte blanche, really, particularly on the textbook. And I made a major sort of redirection, which I can talk about if that's of interest. The expertise needed, that's important. Selecting a publisher, how you go about doing that, and the relationship with the publisher, which is critical. Co-authors, another critical aspect of writing a book. I have had co-authors on almost all of my books, and I've had other books besides the 2 main ones there. I enjoy working with co-authors. I have some comments about selecting co-authors and where you might find co-authors. Ancillaries, who's responsible, what are they, what's needed, what's involved with producing them, that may be of interest. Preparing for the next edition, that is a whole operation unto itself. And then one that I'm considering at this point in my career is succession. What happens to the book? Who takes it over? What is my role when that happens? How do you find the right person to come on and move the book forward? Does it still have an audience, and is it going to move forward? So those are all various topics. Let me ask, there's only a handful of us here. Are there any of those that are that speak to you that are of particular interest?
I think related to the publisher, in my case, it all started because I said, why don't you have a book like this, exactly like this one for the sub area? So that's where I started with it. But I was wondering whether, if there isn't interest there, do you kind of like shop it around, or what are the rules around the approach with the book proposal, I guess, is one of my questions.
So I can talk a bit about various publishers. The book proposal and shopping it, I've not really had experience with. But what I did chop was when I first started on it's a hotel restaurant travel law book. I taught it for a couple of semesters. It's a niche market and there were a finite number of books. I spent a semester with each of the books, didn't like any of them. I picked the last one that I used and sent a note to the publisher and said, I'm a new faculty member in this field. I don't think there's a good book. I would be happy to address my concerns with your book and participate in a rewrite. Well, it happened that of the two co-authors, one had sort of aged out and was no longer able to do another edition, and the other had always been the name on the book. He was very big in the field, but never wrote much of the book. So the publisher was looking for somebody. So I was just lucky and went, spent time with them, spent a weekend with the prior author who had, when I say aged out, there was some dementia coming on. He still had his strong views about the book, but was in no shape to continue to write it. So I was lucky. And the publisher was one that focused on niche markets. So not every publisher does. It's not, in my day, who was Samuelson in economics, which sold a quadrillion books, or a major math book, or in my field, a major business law book. And so the fact that it was a niche marketing publisher committed to niche markets was important to me. There came a time when my publisher merged with Cengage, which was in Cengage's heyday. And now Cengage was a very big company. And there came a time when I think Cengage might have done 2 editions, and then they were no longer interested in the niche markets. So then I had fun. I went to a conference for hospitality lawyers. I think it's very important to go to your subject matter conferences and present. And there were numerous publishers in the field. And I just went like booth to booth, sort of shopping the book, and there was a big interest. And then one of the companies, I really meshed with the editor, and I think that's an important relationship. And they were expanding their hospitality holdings, and so very interested in me, and it was a good match. So that's how I ended up with them, which turned out to be a very good move because not long after that, Cengage joined forces with, was it McGraw-Hill, and then went into this Cengage Unlimited, which was hurt many authors very significantly with royalties, because they had a maximum $75 at the time. Students paid 1 fee, and all of their Cengage books were covered by that. So that reduced significantly what Cengage authors made. So that's some comments. I think it's very important to do your homework about the publisher. Who are they? Talk to other authors who have used that publisher, have written for that publisher. Always be prepared for changes, and contracts. I mean, when you get to that point, just always remember that the publisher's contract is gonna benefit the publisher, not you, and you want to have your own lawyer. I'm a lawyer. I hire a lawyer when it comes to the contracts. I'm not a author's lawyer. There's things in I understand there are things in those contracts that don't mean what they seem to say to a lay person, and to have somebody knowledgeable interpret them is critical. But that's my experience on the New York penal law, which is the only other book I write that's closest to a textbook. It's a treatise for lawyers that's updated every year. I've also gone through a couple of publishers, but I came on to that one. The primary book was already written. And there's really merit to that when you are starting from scratch. It's a lot. I mean, a book is a lot to write, even if you're just updating. And to start from scratch is significant. One that's already in existence has a built-in following. It has what I would call a draft, and that you can build from. But if you have a great idea and something that's missing in the market, then it to start from scratch may be a great way to go. Let me ask, this is a roundtable, if anybody else has advice or comments for Renee.
Well, I think, yeah, I think, Karen, you pretty much hit the nail on the head with, it's really important to look around at what publishers might be interested in it and narrow it down. The implication there is then don't waste your time with publishers that definitely aren't in anything close to the field that you're looking at. Because I mean, it's going to take a lot of time just to hit the ones that may be interested. And also, getting, trying to get to that point where you are in contact with an editor, because that's the person who's going to sign you up. And they're the ones that you're going to have a relationship with, at least at the beginning, and support you and get you going in it. A friend of mine, Ken, you may see Ken Saladin's name in the list of participants. Hi, Ken. He and I are in the same field, anatomy and physiology. And a mutual friend of ours who's not here at this meeting, I don't think this year, is Phil Tate. And he told me that he kind of did an informal study of, at least in our field, how long it takes to write a new book, a first edition of a new book. And his view is it takes between 8 and 11 years to get it from, this day, okay,
Wow.
I'm doing it, and then to take it all the way through. Now, that's just in that field. But I think the point is that it's going to take longer than you think. And we've seen a lot of our colleagues in TAA in various disciplines, end up working a long time on that first edition. So my advice is to don't give up. It takes a long time, and there are going to be there's going to be ups and downs in there where you're going to feel frustrated, and then you're going to be elated, and then you're frustrated again, and then elated. And so, be aware of that. But I think, and Karen's story kind of alluded to this, and my story is full of this as well. And maybe Ken has a story to tell too. I think a lot of what happens with this is just a matter of luck. It's just being in the right place at the right time with the right idea, and the right attitude, and you bump into the right people, and it's not just totally random. I mean, you got to make those things happen, like Karen did with going to a conference and going around to the different booths. You got to make it happen. But something gelled at that point, and it was being in the right place at the right time. So you got to work at that. But the work alone isn't enough, because you just got to kind of find where that opportunity is. So Ken, you have something you want to share with that?
Well, it took me actually 2.5 years to write my first edition, and then another year and a half in production. So that sounded like a long estimate that you gave there, but
well, that was his.
Yeah, I've written many editions now, and my biggest concern is successor authors right now, mentoring younger authors, how to find them, how to mentor them, co-author relationships, equal sharing of the workload, and things like that are the big issues I'm dealing with right now. Um, but for the I've got 3 textbooks with McGraw-Hill, and I've just brought in a co-author on the middle book, Human Anatomy, named Justin York. You'll see our edition out this coming January, our first jointly authored edition, which will be my 7th of that title. But we went through a very extensive recruitment process in finding him. We auditioned 9 author wannabes by
Wow.
having them do writing samples and, submit a CV and their vision of the book, and also take my book and explain what they would do differently. And I had one author I called a bull in a china shop who would have changed my brand so radically it would be unrecognizable. And then I had 5 who would have changed it so little I couldn't see very much point to co-authoring with them because they wouldn't add much. So that narrowed it down to 3. We flew those 3 into Dubuque and interviewed the daylights out of them one after another for 3 days running. And I got a very good author out of that process, but it was a very extensive auditioning and interview process to find Justin.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to throw in, I mean, something that's a common thread among all 3 of our stories is, with Karen and I, we came in on books that already existed. And then, as we got familiar with it, we then went off in other directions and did other things. And then Ken talking about his situation now, getting ready to hand it over. There are these opportunities that, I mean, if there's something anywhere like what you're looking for, you might want to pitch that and say, hey, I'm looking at doing this thing a little bit different. Would you be interested in me, sort of jumping in on an existing book and take it in this new direction? Or whatever. I mean, it's just a possibility, but that's a common way for textbook authors to get started in the field.
Yeah, one might perhaps send out probes to the publishers and just ask, do you have any authors in this particular field who are considering retirement? Are there any co-authoring opportunities on the horizon? Send a CV in your fields of interest and see what you come up with. If anybody had done that when I was looking a couple of years ago, they might have gotten a shot at auditioning for this.
That's really interesting. I really hadn't thought at all about it, to be honest. So it's given me some things to think about. To be really forthright, it wasn't like I was thinking, I really am driven to write a textbook. What happened is I found myself complaining about the existing textbooks.
Yeah.
And then somebody sort of approached me a little bit. And then we had some preliminary discussions and talked about it, and so it was more the model. And then I started to feel really more passionate about the idea of doing it. So it's kind of interesting just the way it unfolded. But I have a good opportunity right now for putting together a good proposal, because I did take a sabbatical for the fall. So this is really what I want to be spending my time thinking through. And maybe at the end of this sabbatical process, I'll learn I actually don't want to write for a textbook. I don't know,
It's a big commitment.
Indeed.
It's a big commitment. I do have a co-author. We've done smaller projects together, and we work really, really well together. I'm older, she's younger, so that it's kind of like a nice pairing. And I think we would bring in more like a scientific, sort of journalistic person on it as well. So I don't know, I'm really, total newbie. So everything you're sharing is so helpful to me. I really appreciate it.
Great. I think what Kevin said about a big chunk of luck being involved. When I think about how I wrote this letter to the publisher and said, you know, I don't like your book, but I'm available to rewrite it. And it just happened that the two authors were not able to write it, and they were looking for somebody. Interesting, Ken's story. I think that Robert also had a similar process in terms of finding the next person. That on this book, that wasn't what was happening. But, you know, once you get then on the book, I was also really lucky. One of my co-authors, who was the name in the field, he had an column in a magazine, Hotel Management, which was like the magazine in the field. And he died prematurely, and the publisher of the magazine was looking for somebody they did interview and have people write. And my connection with Tony, from his name, Tony Marshall, my connection with him from the book gave me a leg up, and I was fortunate to get that gig, which I have done now for many, many years. And it adds to the book, and it adds to my circumstances in terms of my name in the field. So yeah, there's a lot of luck that comes with riding the coattails of somebody who came before.
My first book came about. I wasn't looking to write an anatomy and physiology book because I thought there were already a number of good ones on the market in the late 80s. And but I had been writing instructors manuals, test banks, and things like that for William C. Brown, and which was later sold to McGraw-Hill. But because I had been writing these things, I was invited to audition to co-author an anatomy and physiology book by an author who wanted to retire. He had a leading market share in his niche. And I was turned down for that. And I have often told my students that I got rejected for an authorship I really wanted. And it's the best thing that ever happened to me, because instead of coming on a pre-existing book as part of an author team, when I was rejected, they said they thought my writing style was better for a different niche than that book was in. And they said, would you like to write a book of your own? I said, well, and actually I demurred for a couple of years. I didn't immediately accept because I wasn't really sure there was a need for another book in that field. And finally I said, well, if you'll let me do something a little different from what all the other anatomy and physiology books are doing, I might be interested. And they said, well, what was that? I said, well, if you look at the freshman general biology books, it's not just facts handed down ex cathedra. There's a lot of information about the history of the science, the people behind it, the classic experiments and personalities that built this field. And I said, I would like to, I do that in lecture, and I would like to have little sidebars on some of these historical figures in anatomy and physiology. And they were okay with that. And then what's the other thing? I said, well, also when you look at intro bio books, there's not only a story behind the science, there's a story behind the human body. We have an evolutionary history that explains why the body is the way it is today. And this was in the heyday of creationist politics in our state legislatures all over the place. And they kind of said, but but they let me give it a go. And so my first edition also had little evolutionary sidebars on the human body. And the reception to that among instructors was so positive. They said, it's about time an A&P book did this. It's been long neglected. This is a fresh perspective that's really needed. And so they were happy enough that they let me take a chance on that. And that's worked out pretty well.
Great. I also made on the book, when I first came on, a major change. It was really geared towards third and fourth year students. I teach at a community college, so I wanted to make it more friendly for students earlier in their career. And the publisher was very happy with that. The author, the one who was the primary author, was not, but again, he was not willing to able rather to participate. So I heard him
Mm.
out and then went along my, continued on in what I intended. I see that DeAndrea has joined us. DeAndrea, we're sort of doing this roundtable in formal. I have identified a number of topics that we can't possibly get to all of them. If there's something there that is you'd like some comments on, you have a number of senior authors here, or maybe you have something to add on some of them.
Oh, I thank you very much. I'm just listening and learning. So thank you.
Okay, okay. Any,
Well, I just want to throw in too that, I mean, I just really appreciate the things I've learned in TAA. You know, things that I've learned, you know, more formally in, you know, newsletter articles and workshops and so on, but a lot of the informal stuff of like opportunities like this where we can just swap stories and ask each other questions. Hey, how do you do this? Like, Ken, how did you find Justin? You know, and that's good to know, you know, how other people do things, because you know that gives you ideas on how you might do it. And something that Karen said that you're probably going to hear more than once again, because I've already heard it somewhere in some other workshop, is it's really a good idea to get an attorney early. An attorney, not you know, your cousin Dave who writes wills and stuff, but you know, an attorney who knows about publishing and authoring. And you can find those connections here in TAA. There are other ways to find those connections, but it's a lot of, you know, when you're first beginning and you don't have an income from writing, it seems like an unreasonably large expense. And as one of our attorney friends has been heard to say is, well, that's okay. You don't have to pay me now, but you're going to end up paying me later if you don't pay me now. I mean, the point being that it's better to set a good groundwork, you know, early on so that you don't run into trouble later. And, you know, as Karen, I think mentioned, I've heard other people mention, is publishers, you know, when they come up, you know, they're not always, when they give you a contract, it's like in their best interest. This is a contract that favors us. It's a boilerplate, and they'll tell you, well, it's a boilerplate. Everybody signs that. No, they don't. They want everybody to sign it, and a lot of them do, but it's best not to. So I'm just throwing that out there as yet another voice saying, please, please, please don't do what I did. And you know, because I came in with a co-author and I asked him, should I get an attorney? Oh, no, you don't need that. And I'm like, oh, that was, he usually gave me very good advice, but that one was not good. So luckily I eventually got an attorney and have fixed some things that were broken.
Yeah, I would second that. I wish I had done that when I accepted that first contract. Nowadays, I have an attorney on board with me all the time, but it is daunting when you're. When I was a struggling assistant professor, I guess I was associate by then, you know, and trying to feed a family, and you look at attorney's fees, and it's a daunting prospect, because if I get on the phone with my attorney now and we chat for something for half an hour, that costs me $200 or more for that phone call, you know, and it's rather hard when you're a starting author and you're not making any royalties to figure out, how can I afford this? But I really wish I had, because I was taken advantage of early on, and I had to fight hard for better rights later on. Once you get a contract, it's very hard to change it.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And it sounds like there are a lot of changes with the movement to digital and the work involved. That was brought up in another session that we were talking about. So, you know, the state of that, our attorneys kind of shifting, like some of their advice based on sort of the shifting model of what the work is.
Absolutely. A lawyer who's knowledgeable about things authoring is very on top of that. And royalties can vary depending upon the format in which the work is ultimately offered. and if the wording isn't tight in the contract as relates to new technology, the author can lose out. Kevin, your story about the lawyer saying you can pay me now or pay me later is just so true. That first contract may bind you to that publisher and lays the foundation for the future of your relationship. And so it's critical and can very much disadvantage the author. So yeah, whatever the cost is, it is money well spent. I would concur about TAA. TAA is just wonderful. Somehow I was lucky and found TAA very early in my career. There are things that I published and opportunities that I sought that I was motivated by the people who I met and hung out with at TAA that otherwise I wouldn't have known to pursue or might not have felt confident or comfortable in doing. I look forward to you folks all being together next year when there's not just the sessions that we're together, but dinners out where you can talk and learn a lot more about what everybody's doing and how they did it and how that can inspire you. That's important. Any
Yes, I thank you so much for sharing that, because I am new at this, and I did publish a textbook actually through Top Hat actually, and I felt very isolated in going through that process. I'm a speech teacher, so mine was focused on public speaking. But I thank you for sharing that, because I didn't even realize that maybe I needed to consider also involving, getting myself involved with an attorney as well. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And there are attorneys here who present and they're supportive of authors and very knowledgeable. And
Great.
so, yeah, it's a great way to meet and greet. Excuse me.
That's okay.
Attorneys who can be helpful.
Thank you. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, when you come in as a new author, at least in my case, I had no idea what normal royalties on a textbook were. And they'll tell you something, they'll say, well, this is normal, this is average, but they were really lowballing me. And a knowledgeable publishing attorney will know what the norms are.
Okay.
And help you a lot in negotiating a better royalty that will more than repay your legal expenses.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and TAA has been regularly publishing a author's royalty survey where that also gives you some clues as to what other people are getting. I mean, it includes a lot of people, including very experienced longtime authors, and many of them have had used opportunities they've gotten to increase their royalty rate or increase some other aspect of their contract. And somebody said, I don't know if you were in that one previous workshop, and I can't remember which one it was, but somebody mentioned that, whenever, publishers are made a lot of changes among publishers. Ken just mentioned that he first started working with William C. Brown, which was a big player in anatomy, physiology, and biology and in related areas. And then they got bought up by McGraw-Hill. And my publisher, same way. I was originally working with an imprint called Mosby. They got bought up by Times Mirror. They got bought up by Elsevier. And so and Karen mentioned about Cengage as well. So these companies are constantly evolving and eating each other up and spitting each other out. And your contract goes along with them. I mean, that's what they're buying and selling, or this collection of contracts for books. And in a lot of times the new publisher is going to say, well, we have some changes. We have our own standard way of doing things. So we just got a few changes. I'll send it to you and you sign it. Okay. Don't do that. Get an attorney for two reasons. One is, the changes they want to make are probably not in your favor. And they may be okay, but they may be neutral and they just want to standardize things. But it's worth having someone who knows what they're doing look to see whether it's unfavorable to you. And then the second thing is, I think Paul Krieger brought this up in a previous workshop, and that gives you, anytime they come to you with a change, that means they're reopening negotiations. So that means you are now in a position to say, okay, you want that? Well, here's what I want.
Okay.
And so, you go back and forth, and that's for me, and I know a lot of authors say the same thing. That's hard to do. We're
Yes.
not typically in the business of negotiating, and so at least not that kind of negotiation. So we want to kind of get along and be friends with our publisher, and it's kind of hard to say, no, that's not acceptable. I can't do that. That's not in my favor. It's hard to push back because it feels like they have all the power.
Indeed.
But
Mhm.
we have all the content. So we have some power too that we don't often realize. And so it's two powerful beings that are kind of going head to head. And if you look at it that way, with the support of an attorney who will keep reminding you of that, because it's kind of hard to sustain that attitude. At least for me, it is hard to sustain that. And
Indeed.
so, that's, if you haven't signed if anybody hasn't signed a contract yet, then that means it's even more wide open for negotiation. So that's good
Great.
too.
Thank you. Mhm.
I would also say something Ken brought up about the co-author saying, just sign this. Remember that your relationship with the co-author is also a legal one, and you should have a contract with your co-author. And
Yes.
at that point, you and he or she are not on sharing the same interests. You each have your own interests to watch for. And so there should be a contract that makes it clear who does what, how are you divvying up the chapters, how are you divvying up royalties. I now am going to require a good conduct clause. We had on the last edition, I brought in two new people, two new authors, both lawyers, both teachers. One of them was disbarred, which is like a very, meaning he could no longer practice law. He was neglecting clients. It happened that his father was president of the school. He seemed to be, have lots of great credentials, but, and then I was concerned now when we did the next edition, was he gonna want some piece of the royalties because we were using some of what he had written. Fortunately, he slinked away, but now we'll address the importance of maintaining good relations with the rest of the world by the co-author.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank
and
you.
another issue is the order of the names on the book. That can be something that needs to be negotiated between the various authors. Can be a sticking point.
Yeah. And another thing too is this is something that the original author that I started, joining on his book and helping out with, he and I got along great. In so many different ways. I mean, it was just, it was a great relationship, except for one thing. He and I did not see eye to eye on the royalty split, because the publisher, they will tell you, well, here's how much percent you as the author, meaning this entity made up of one or more people. So that could include several co-authors. So he and I were the author on the contract. And then it was up to him and I to work out,
Right.
what that was. And I mean, he had been there longer, so he kind of did have a little more power, I guess. And I wasn't happy for a few of those contracts, and I didn't want to be unhappy. He didn't want me to be unhappy, but he didn't want to give me any more money either. So yeah, it took a while. We finally decided, well, let's at least come up with a plan for how this is going to change over the next few editions. So, You know, we
Absolutely.
put, you know, it goes to Karen's point of you come up with an agreement between the co-authors, and I agree that that's very important to do. And I won't tell the story, but I was signed for a book. It never got published, but I was signed for a book and started working with a co-author who I had not met before we got together and decided. The publisher put us together and we talked to each other, and he had written another book, I had written another book, so we thought this was a win-win situation, and he ended up in prison during the process. So
Yeah.
you know, I agree with that good conduct.
I saw you
Oh,
chuckle. I
you
thought
guys
you
have
had
quite a few interesting stories there about your co-authors. I'm thinking, is this something I don't know about my colleague?
Well, you
So
know,
you're saying, are you saying that in the contract, the with the publisher, they won't specify to the level of co-author, that they just use a blanket author, and it really is between the people who are jointly working on it?
well, I mean, it depends on the publisher probably, and that particular editor and what their experience is. But generally, I mean, if you're coming in on something, then generally a contract exists. And so they will probably offer you and say, well, you know, here's the author, they're going to get so many percent, let's say 10%. That's my publisher's boilerplate number, is 10%. And so then they'll say, okay, now it's up to the co-authors to work out, well, are you going to split it 50-50? Is it going to be 60-40? How is it going to be? And if there's already an author on there, they're probably going to offer you and say, well, look, I've been on this for a long time, I really built this up, so I'm going to, you know, here's what the split is, and it might be 90-10 or something like that. And or, you know, 25-75, or it just depends on the situation. So most publishers, is my impression, sort of leave it up to the authors to make an agreement among themselves what it's going to be. I don't think they generally impose it. Now, all of my publishers, or all my editors, I should say, at the publisher, they're the ones that are handling the contracts. That's part of their job. And they've been willing to, you know, act as an intermediary and give suggestions and throw out examples and talk about what factors might be considered and stuff like that. But I don't think I've ever heard of a case where they came in and said, it's going to be 75-25, whether you two agree to that or not. That's what we think it should be. I mean, that just doesn't make for a good business relationship, I don't think. So but it will be specified. It will usually be specified in the contract, though. I mean, you agree to it, then they put it in the contract and you sign it. So,
Yeah. There are a number of things that, like how you're going to divvy up the writing and so forth, your respective responsibilities on the project, that I found better. They don't really go in a contract with the publisher. We put them in a memorandum of understanding between the authors, and that doesn't go through the legal department of the publisher. It's just what my co-author and I mutually agree to. And I don't know what legal impact it has, but at least it puts on paper what you initially felt mutually agreed was an equitable arrangement.
Like
So,
very important to have that agreement between the co-authors so that it's clear and
yes.
no hard feelings once you're off and running. Everybody knows what they're getting. They've had their chance to be heard and have agreed to what the final arrangement was.
Mhm.
so something that just, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So that when you do have co-authors, it doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely, you are correct.
Right.
And it can be, as Kevin said, changed over time. So the first edition that somebody new comes on, they may be getting a smaller percentage. And if things work out and the book goes to a next edition, the contract between the co-authors may say on the second edition, that new author gets some more. And that may increase over several releases of the book. also that can be influenced by the fact that the senior author who's outgoing, assuming there's a senior author who's outgoing, which is why somebody new is coming on, that senior author may be getting some percentage of the royalties, even though he or she has stopped contributing to the book. So that senior could get on the next one or two editions, or maybe even more, a certain percentage. That means someone in the currently writing author positions are going to get less than they might if that senior author wasn't being paid.
Yes, that's pretty much what I've done with our first edition, working together on a title that I've done for several editions previously. On our first edition together, my co-author gets 1/3, I get 2/3. Then, assuming that works out well, we go 50-50 on our next edition, and from then on out. And then, beyond, in addition to that, when I retire, I have a contractual step down agreement. So the next edition, when I have just utterly quit working on the book, I still get a significant percentage, and I get a 2 edition step down, and then I wind up at a 10% residual royalty for as long as I live. Even if I'm not writing anymore, I get 10% as long as my name is used on the brand.
Well, that's a great
That is good.
amount.
So if someone, for instance, only, let's say you have the co-authors that have contributed the majority of it, but you have maybe one person that contributed maybe 2 chapters out of the entire text, would they be considered contributors, and would they receive some of the royalties or not, or just name recognition?
There are a couple ways you can go on that. If the person were named as a co-author, I certainly wouldn't say they would warrant 50% of the royalties if they've only written 2 of the book's several chapters. But they could also be regarded as a contributor. They could get a percentage of royalties, or they could get what's called a work for hire, where you get a flat payment for your contribution on a single edition. And that's independent of the sales of the book. You just know going in, you're going to get like $30,000 to do this or something like that, you know.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
There are
that's
different ways to handle that.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
I
I'm
was
done.
just going to say that's what I have done, because I'm, in a similar position, looking at retiring. And so I have a team of 3 other co-authors who are going to be eventually taking over. And, with each new edition of each title, they're taking over more and more of the writing duties, and I'm doing less and less. But before I settled on those 3, I had a group of 6, and they were all contributors, and they each were doing like 2 chapters, revising 2 chapters, and they were not listed as co-authors on the cover, but inside it said, here's the contributor panel here. And then from among those 6, I chose 3 that sort of rose to the top. Actually, all 6 of them were really good, but 6 is too many to work on a book. My brain cannot handle that. So it was, it was a tough decision, but but then we ended up with 3, and the other 3, we use them as contributors, like on ancillaries and things like that. And so, they can do, there are other opportunities for them, even though they didn't get the original gig they were hoping for. And so that, so that was kind of a, they were contributors first, and then, okay, now I think I want you to come in as a co-author. And now their names are on the front, on the front cover, and, and they play a different role now, because they're more decision makers rather than implementers of a vision. Now they're helping shape the vision of the book. So.
I was going to mention ancillaries. That's a way as a new author to get seen and tried out as a possible author. Ancillaries, things like the professors, what's the word I'm looking for?
PowerPoints? It would be
That
with
could
those.
be things like PowerPoints, test banks, the teacher's manual, that's the word I'm
Yes.
looking for. I'm testing out a new author with a blog and possibly podcasts. We have some ideas for what the blog is going to look like, and it will be in effect an ancillary, enhance the textbook, and a good chance to see whether this new potential co-author is able to contribute in the way that we would like.
That's great.
So ancillaries is another opportunity for a new author to see and be seen.
That's great.
Anything
There's
else?
another-
Great, take it away, Ken.
I was going to say there's another aspect of co-authorship that we haven't touched on yet. I had launched 2 books before we brought in my first co-author many years ago, and they had given me a contract for that third book. It was to be kind of what we call an essentials version of the big book for trade schools and the like. And my other 2 books just kept coming up for revision, leapfrogging each other every 3 years for each one, and I couldn't get that new one off the ground. I had 3 chapters out of 20, 3 or 4 written. And they said, well, how about if we get you a co-author on that one to speed things up? Well, co-authors don't speed things up in my experience. Co-authorship slows it down a great deal, because if I'm solo author, as I still am on my big book, I make a decision and 20 minutes later I'm writing it. As a co-author, if I make a decision, I've got to email my co-author and say, what do you think of this? And then get a reaction back, and we go back and forth. And so it's not 20 minutes later I'm writing it, it's 2 weeks later. and so that little book, I had written my first one, my big one, which was a little over 1,100 pages. I had written that fully in 2.5 years. The smallest of my 3 books, which was about 750 pages, took us 6 years of co-authorship. So it did not speed things up at all.
Well, and boy, those deadlines can be critical. The contract is probably going to say that the manuscript is due on a certain date, and some may be flexible and others may not be. And if you don't have it on the due date, that gives them an out if they're not interested in publishing, or they're having second thoughts, they've got the book, whatever it is. So when you commit to writing a book, you really have to commit to putting in the time to make sure that you can complete it in time specified in the contract.
Yes.
But with the first edition, that wasn't so critical, because the book, it wasn't out there. Nobody knew it. Nobody knew it was coming, and you get it done when you can. But when you've got a book already out there and you're into your revision cycle, whether it's a 3 or 4 year cycle, and you're kind of positioning your book to come out at the same time as your major competitors to get these adoptions, then the deadlines are very critical. And if you come in late and you don't have a book to put on the professors' desks in January, February, you can lose a lot of market share.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You got to be out there when they're releasing theirs, or you can be out in the cold for a few years.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's great.
Right, and you might think no big deal if you're a little late, but the publisher's got it all planned when it goes to print and when it goes to copy editing, and you get out of sync with them, and your book could go to the back of the line. So those dates are important.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anything else? Any other questions or comments?
I just
Well,
wanted
thanks,
to
Karen.
thank you
Oh,
all
go ahead.
so much, with your experience and knowledge. It's been very, very helpful as someone all new to this to have this kind of a discussion. I really appreciate your time.
I feel the same way. I'm honored to be among you and listen to you. So I wanted to listen to your wisdom and get that. And thank you so much for being so willing to share.
And thanks to Ken and Kevin for adding their experience to this discussion. Mhm.
Thank you for putting it together, Karen. It was, I'd like to do this more often and, have this kind of talk with other authors more often.
Great, great.
Sounds good.
So next year you can submit for Musings
Yeah.
by a longtime author.
I'm
Take the
putting
same
his
title.
name in. Ken said that he's going to
Oh.
facilitate one of them.
Perfect, perfect. Well, wow, everybody, and enjoy the conference. I think this concludes today. Is that